Glue is sticky. And it's supposed to be sticky because glue is meant to stick things together. Sometimes we use glue to repair something that is broken, where a piece breaks off of one thing and we take that little piece and we use glue to stick it back so that they can be reconnected. Sometimes we use the stickiness of glue to make something new. Two things that weren't together are stuck together with that glue to make a new thing that is now different. Glue is about connecting things. As we hear the story about the centurion, it is easy to see in this a humble faith, a man who sees himself as not worthy of Jesus' attention, and yet he asks for help. And Jesus is amazed at this faithfulness, and somehow in that slave of his is healed. And we could walk away from this story and say it's about that humility and understanding that we're not worthy and living in that sort of faith. And that is certainly part of the story, but there's also a depth to this story beyond that. And it comes, I think, in the connections. Just as glue connect things, there are connections in this story. The centurion is a person that knows other people, and he is connected. He has soldiers underneath him, he has his own slaves, but he also has connections in the community. And they are pretty deep connections, as we see these elders of the Jews that he sends to Jesus. They come to Jesus and they say, listen, this guy's fantastic. He built our synagogue, he loves us, he is worthy of you spending some time going over and bringing some healing to this slave. And in that way, you see the centurion using the connections that he has, using the people that he knows to get closer to Jesus so that his slave might come to healing. I was reminded of my favorite author, one of my favorite authors this week. His name is Khalil Gibran, and he was an early 20th century Lebanese-American author. He's well known for a book called The Prophet. But he wrote lots of other things, including a story called Two Infants. Two Infants opens up with a prince coming out on the balcony of the palace and announcing to all of the people that a new baby has been born, a new royal heir. And he talks about the genealogy and how this heir will one day come into this great glory and be the leader of this people. And the crowds all then rejoice and give thanks and cheer. And as Gibran tells the story, he says that they are giving thanks and cheering for the one who will one day become their oppressor. So while all of that is happening with this one royal baby, the story switches scenes and says at the same time, across town, another baby was born. This baby born to a mother. The story tells us that the father had died at the oppression of the current ruler. So you have this baby born to a mother who cannot feed the child, cannot clothe the child, has nothing to give the child. And she ultimately says, I have nothing to give you but my tears. And the story takes a pretty dark turn then at the end as the mother and the child lie and die together, even as this other baby is being raised up and celebrated. And in that you see this drastic difference across this very same town between two babies that can be born in different circumstances. One that's deeply connected and one that is disconnected. And I thought of this story this week as I heard about this centurion who is deeply connected, who has all of these people that he knows, and it's those connections that get him closer to Jesus so that healing can come to his slave. And I couldn't help but thinking that on the other side of Capernaum, perhaps, there was a mother with a child, maybe the same age as that slave, maybe with the same sickness, maybe also close to death, but disconnected, not connected to the Jewish people that knew Jesus, not connected to the power structures, not connected in any way so that healing could not come to that child. And I think we maybe know that this is how everything works in our world. We say in our culture it's not what you know, but who you know, which is about connections. And we, as we gather in this place, many of us probably have connections. We may not have connections to the wealthiest people in the world, but we're able to get access to health care. We're able, most of us, to work if we need to, and all of those sorts of connections that keep us whole, at least as whole as we can be, and functioning in this culture in which we live. But there are plenty of people who aren't connected. They may have some connections in their lives, but they don't have connections all the way around that help them to live as fully as they can. Some people don't have access to health care or meaningful access to education. We have immigrants in this country that we say are undocumented who have to sort of fly under the radar, and in that way they're not connected fully into the society and the structures that we do have. We have homeless people and poor people that are disconnected from meaningful income and the sorts of things that can help them live life. But there are also lots of people who have education and healthcare, but they're disconnected from community. They don't have meaningful relationships in their lives that help them to just be emotionally and psychologically and spiritually whole. And then there are whole groups of people that are disconnected from Jesus, disconnected from this one that was died and raised so that we might be whole. And they don't know this whole story that we talked about this morning with the kids. They don't know how it is that Jesus has shaped us. And with all of that disconnection, you can come back to this story and look at the connections that this centurion has. And what unfolds in this story is fascinating to me, because while the connections are there, and it's part of the way that the healing comes, the connections aren't the thing that heal the slave. What heals the slave is Jesus' grace. But when you come to the story and just listen to how it unfolds, it's fascinating to me. First of all, the elder Jews, who are, in theory, the religious people, they're the people that come from Jesus' tribe and worship the God Jesus worships, they come to Jesus and they appeal to him on the basis of the centurion's worth. They say, listen, this guy really deserves healing. This guy has done a lot for us. He has earned it. Now, we should know enough about Jesus to know that that's not how Jesus works, is it? All they had to do was say, hey, there's somebody sick over there. Can you go help them? And Jesus' mercy and compassion and grace would have said, sure. But they come because they don't fully get who Jesus is, and they appeal to him based on the worth of this centurion. Now, the centurion, for as much as Jesus is amazed by his faith, because he doesn't see that level of faith in the people that he's preaching to every day, the centurion also doesn't get it, because he appeals to Jesus not on the basis of mercy and compassion of grace, but of power. He says, listen, I'm not worthy, but I know how authority works. You tell people to go and they go. You tell people to come and they come. I get it. You have that. So use your power to make my slave whole again. Now that's also not how Jesus works, is it? Because if he functioned on power, he would not have gone to the cross and died in the weakness of that place. Jesus' strength comes from self-sacrifice. Jesus' strength comes from that weakness, not from the earthly power and authority we understand. So the centurion, for as much faith as he has in Jesus, it's still faith that somehow is rooted in this sense of power and authority. The reality is what heals that slave, and what holds this whole story together, the glue that connects it, is not that they know each other, it's not the work that they've done or the worth that they have, but it's the grace of God. The grace of God is the sticky glue that holds this community together in this story. Even before Jesus is there, it is grace that has allowed this Roman centurion and these Jewish people to build a relationship together. And as Jesus arrives and this healing comes, it is the sticky grace of God that is what connects them and makes them into this whole story that flows, that brings healing to this slave. And so as we go along in this season of the life of the church, in this Pentecost season, perhaps we could reflect on what it is to have sticky grace and what our role is. Because if you look at this story, none of them really totally get Jesus. The centurion doesn't, the elders of the Jews don't, and yet, there they are. These elders of the Jews who don't fully get Jesus connect the centurion to him. They're the go-between. They're the ones that bring this word from the centurion to Jesus, and on the way back send Jesus in that direction. And so it maybe makes sense for us to think about how we as the church can be that sticky glue of grace that live in this world in which we live. Because there are people who are disconnected. And if nobody's paying attention to those people who are disconnected, they just stay that way. And they live in that lonely, difficult place of not having meaningful life and relationships, or even the basics of healthcare and education and all of that in their lives. And for all of those that are disconnected from Jesus, but otherwise are connected in some ways into our culture, maybe we're the ones that are supposed to sit in that place in between and be the sticky glue of grace that brings people together. Catalysts for community. People that go out and find those who are disconnected and reconnect them into the life-giving love that we know in Jesus. Because that's how grace works. It is sticky. If you take a big bottle of glue and pour it out on them, just pour it out, where's it go? Spreads out, right? So normally when we glue things together, we just put a little bead on there, because if you get too much, it squirts out the edges, and then you got a big mess, and you got to clean that up, and it gets all sticky and gross. With glue, that's not good. But with grace, that's fantastic. Because if grace gets poured out in huge measures and just starts to spread out, that means it gets further and further. And if when we stick things together with grace and it squirts out the sides and it gets sticky again, that means it continues to stick beyond the connection that we thought we made. And this is the beautiful thing about how Jesus works in our lives. It's not the worth that we bring. It's not the understanding that we bring, whether that's about value and what we've done, or it's about the authority and power that we might see. Grace lands on us in ways that we don't expect. And God gives us so much of it, it doesn't run out, that when we go out into the world, not because we have to, but because we get the opportunity to, when we go out and share that grace. And whether that's in a word of forgiveness, whether it's in a meal that is shared, whether it's in sitting down with a kid in the cafeteria who nobody will sit with, or being nice to the person at work that everybody can't stand, all of those little things we do that start to build those connections. It's not because we're so good at it, but it's because God is good at it, and the grace that we understand sticks to us, and then it starts to stick to others, and it spills out, and squirts out, and then we become this big sticky mess of grace. And we know that relationships are messy, aren't they? They're always messy. That's why we have all these disconnections. But Jesus understands that, and he brings that stickiness of grace into our lives through the stickiness of the cross and the even stickier life of new resurrection. May we be blessed as we go to know that it is not we who do this, but God's grace working through us makes us God's sticky people, carrying forgiveness and mercy and grace everywhere we go. Amen.